Good afternoon, Oki. Thank you for joining us this afternoon. I want to acknowledge that we are gathered on territory of the signatories of Treaty 7, and I acknowledge the Métis people who share a deep connection with this land. Today, we saw that the province is awash in resource revenue earnings, and the fact is that that is from a spike in the price of oil after Russia's invasion of Ukraine. As a result, we have the highest level of resource revenue ever recorded. That makes it clear that this surplus has nothing to do with the actions of the UCP government. In fact, despite record resource revenue, Albertans continue to struggle. When it comes to the crisis in healthcare, what today's fiscal update shows us is that the UCP is not planning to keep healthcare investment at inflation plus population growth. It's an effective $332 million cut while we are reeling from the pandemic and our healthcare system desperately needs rebuilding. Also, new wage data shows today that Alberta had the second slowest wage growth in the country in the month of September. In addition, we know that roughly half of Albertans are just $200 away from not being able to pay their bills and have had to cut back on necessities. And as a result, we are seeing food bank usage at record high levels. Now, the government is actually predicting in today's update that things will get materially worse in the Alberta economy. Wages will stay well below inflation for this year, that's according to their own numbers, and are barely expected to keep pace next year. The price of oil is in fact expected to fall. GDP growth is expected to drop by almost half. That's really concerning. There are storm clouds on the horizon. And while the UCP has attempted to reverse some of their policies that have added over $2 billion of costs onto struggling Albertans, this plan is poorly thought out. It is frantic. It misses a wide swath of Albertans, and it doesn't come anywhere near undoing all the damage that they have authored themselves. And just today, they announced that they had to raid their previous commitment to the Heritage Savings Trust Fund to do it. A total of $1.7 billion sucked out of the Heritage Fund out of previous commitments by Danielle Smith. My friends, this is how you piss away a boom. And yet, we still didn't see any action on a utility rate cap, a freeze on insurance rates, or anything to address the rising cost of groceries. And that's what's actually on Albertans' minds. So the last thing we need right now is more costs or more chaos. And yet, Danielle Smith is proposing exactly that. She plans to risk Albertans' retirement security by pulling out of CPP. According to the government's own analysis, that will mean that Alberta has to take on $133 billion in unfunded liability and reduce returns to Albertans. She's made a commitment to scrap the RCMP at a cost of probably over $200 million per year and over $300 million in startup costs. Danielle Smith said recently in her mandate letter to her finance minister that she plans to create a revenue agency that will grow Alberta's bureaucracy by 20%, cost Albertans $500 million, and the only real material difference in Albertans' lives is that we'll have to file our taxes twice. On top of this, Danielle Smith's plan for healthcare is to charge Albertans to pay out of pocket for healthcare. Perhaps that's where that $332 million shortfall will come from. It'll come from us. And to top it all off, next week, Premier Smith is charging ahead with a Sovereignty Act that will undermine investor confidence and will undermine job growth in the name of flirting with separatism. Instead of all this chaos and conflict and costs, what we need is a strategic plan to address the affordability crisis. We need a thoughtfully constructed utility rate cap that will give people price certainty on their electricity and natural gas. We need a thoughtful plan on automobile insurance that we know has skyrocketed by more than 30%, and an actual investigation and some real action on why prices for food are so high. We need real investments in healthcare to make sure that we can instill stability, take action on wait times and on emergency response, and make sure people have a family doctor. And we need to make strategic, fiscally prudent investments to build a resilient economy that creates high-quality, mortgage-paying jobs. Thank you, and I'm happy to take your questions.
Okay, we'll start with questions in person. Seeing none, we'll go to questions on the line. Just a reminder to use the raise hand function if you're joining by Zoom, and *9 if you're joining by phone. First question goes to Michelle Bellefontaine.
Also asking questions for my colleagues in Radio Canada. So first of all, I'm just wondering if you could speak a little bit. You say that there's, storm clouds on the horizon and this is how you piss away a boom. And I'm wondering if you can explain why you're saying that en français, s'il vous plaît.
Oh, en français. There's the twist at the end. Thanks, Michelle. Alors, dans ces documents-là, on voit que le gouvernement a dit que l'économie va décélérer un peu. On va voir que la compensation pour le travail va être moins de l'inflation pour cette année ici et pour l'année prochaine aussi. On voit que dans les forecasts que le prix de l'huile et du pétrole va abaisser un peu et aussi notre croissance économique va aussi abaisser l'année prochaine. Alors, nous avons des défis dans l'économie. Nous avons les défis pour les gens, pour leurs dépenses mensuelles. Et ce qu'on voit ici, c'est qu'on manque un plan. C'est un peu frantique. C'est pas vraiment substantif. C'est désigné pour un peu d'action avant l'élection. Mais c'est pas un plan dans lequel on voit une approche très substantive et qui va être un plan pour la certainté de l'investissement, pour prendre action sur le chômage, etc.
Did you have a follow-up, Michelle?
Yeah, this time en anglais. I was wondering if you could speak a little bit about the fairness of the measures that have been announced by the Smith government, and particularly in terms of those cash benefit plans about how somebody who is childless and not a senior citizen and not on benefit plans yet maybe makes minimum wage isn't going to benefit from these measures. And I'm just wondering about the perception of fairness here and how you see it.
This is exactly why when you are governing in a way that really comes down to a very chaotic, unplanned approach, which we have seen from Danielle Smith from the very beginning. It's very unserious, and that's how you end up with this sort of back of the napkin, frantic type of public policy, and it's exactly reflective of how she ran on the election campaign in terms of indulging various ideas that are quite outside of the mainstream. They are not well thought through, and that's how we've seen her first set of fiscal decisions. There is no doubt that families require a bit of assistance at this time, and that is why we're now seeing hundreds of millions of dollars, adding up to about $1 billion to re-index the tax code. That is money that had been taken out of every single personal income tax filer's pocket up until now. And that's why that was such an unfortunate decision at the time. But there is no question that you're going to make these kinds of mistakes when you're really only looking at writing or sending out gift cards before an election rather than actually making a plan for a resilient approach to Alberta's future.
Okay, we'll go to our next caller. Go ahead, caller. Your line should be open.
Hi, Shannon. I really appreciate you discussing how this is how you piss away a boom. But I'm wondering, I mean, if the NDP was in government right now, are you really saying that the NDP would be more fiscally restrained in this situation? I mean, surely the NDP would be spending at this point in time. I mean, I guess I'm just trying to like square this for readers who are thinking this might be somewhat of an odd comment to come from the NDP.
Well, it's certainly not an odd comment to come from me or from Rachel Notley, who made the commitment to certainly save the majority of our surplus revenues. We talked about that in July, and that is why we engaged the services of former chief economist of ATB Financial, Todd Hirsch, to give us some advice on how to ensure that our economy and our balance sheet is resilient to the future. Going back and forth on, oh yes, we're going to save 1.7 billion. Oh no, just kidding, we're not going to save 1.7 billion. The fact of the matter is that the Heritage Fund is managed for the long term, and this sort of ad hoc, frantic approach just is not good for the long-term fiscal sustainability of Alberta's balance sheet. There's also no question that the counterfactual in this case is quite difficult, because we never would have de-indexed the personal income tax code, costing tax filers hundreds of millions of dollars. We never would have de-indexed AISH, for example. We never would have de-indexed the seniors benefit and other benefit programs. There is also no question, too, that in 2019, this government removed the utility rate cap for people's electricity bills, and people's electricity bills went through the roof. Similarly, too, for car insurance. So we'd be in a different place, I think, overall with the affordability picture. For Albertans, if we were to cast our minds back to the fall of 2019 when they began making these decisions, so too would we have a different investment climate, because of course we had things like the digital media tax credit, investor tax credit, and other ways to diversify the economy and attract new investment in place that were cancelled by the UCP. So we would be looking at a completely different playing field. But I don't think that it's at all inconsistent to say, look, we would have a pragmatic, fiscally responsible, predictable approach to Alberta's balance sheet that would reflect a very careful investment climate and ensuring that we have the right business conditions for more stable, predictable revenues into the province, and therefore giving us an ability to plan for the future and how we might approach surplus management and overall fiscal management.
Did you have a follow-up?
No, thank you very much. You answered my follow-up question. Thank you, Shannon.
Okay, thanks. We'll go to our next caller.
Hi there, it's Jeremy Thompson with CTV Edmonton. Just wondering if I could get your thoughts on the dire situation in Edmonton when it comes to homelessness right now. The city council is looking at spending, like $7.5 billion just for 6 months of additional 200 or so shelter spaces to address, the needs of the vulnerable community. They're saying, this is a provincial jurisdiction. It should be the province footing that bill, especially in the context of the massive surplus. Wondering what your thoughts are on the provincial approach to homelessness and basically making the city foot the bill for the shelter.
Let me say this, that we have seen since 2019 a significantly diminished investment in the capital plan in housing to the tune of hundreds of millions of dollars, in fact, of a reduction on a previous capital investment in housing. And ultimately that provision of housing stock, whether it's through housing authorities and other provincial investments, we are now seeing those chickens come home to roost. Similarly, too, we see an explosion of homelessness, not just in Edmonton, certainly in my home city of Lethbridge, also, too, because there have been cuts to the rental supplement for people on income assistance. And those consequences of those reductions, which are entirely unnecessary, particularly in the context of this surplus, those consequences are now manifesting themselves on the streets of our cities. And so what we need is certainly a much more substantive approach on the capital investment side to work with cities on not just transitional housing, but also, too, then social housing provision and affordable housing. There's sort of a three-pronged approach there that goes far beyond a mat on the floor in a shelter, which I think we can all agree is a fundamentally partial and inadequate response to the problem of there being housing shortages. And then what we need is to ensure that we have the right affordability pieces in place, and we have not seen the government take action on that rent supplement program as well. And so those are the first two pieces that I will offer on that. There is no question that municipalities across this province are struggling with homelessness. Downtown communities are struggling with homelessness. I myself live in downtown Lethbridge, and we have seen an explosion of encampments and people without homes. And yet we have a provincial government that has almost entirely divested itself of its responsibility in the capital plan to make those long-term investments. We've had 3 years of them dragging their feet on this, and now we see the predictable results in the streets of our cities.
Did you have a follow-up, Jeremy?
Just to follow up, quickly here, given this big surplus that the province has, some councillors in Edmonton are suggesting, it could be a simple decision. Basically, Premier Smith could snap her fingers and fund at least this shelter in Edmonton for $7.5 million. Is it that easy? When you're in government, is it easy as just making a decision to do it, or is there sort of like bureaucracy in the way that can slow things down?
I think what is easy is to ensure that you have stable, predictable funding for operational, for your contracted social agencies, and for people's rent supplement programs, which are statutory or go on top of the statutory expenses in income support. We haven't seen that from this government. They've been extremely reticent to take housing, homelessness, and social services seriously across the board within their operational spending. Ideally, you are not having to dip into your surplus revenues in order to solve some of these problems, because you have already thought of them in the operational budget process. These are not issues that seem to occur to the UCP at all. Now that we are in this situation, there is certainly an opportunity to revisit what should be built into the year-over-year plan and what should be built into the capital plan. That, too, is relatively easy to do. And in fact, the government could have even done it in this mid-year economic update. They have so far failed to do so. I do not think that they necessarily care very much about downtown Edmonton, downtown Calgary, or downtown Lethbridge, where we see, I know that there are other places where these issues have bubbled to the forefront. I'm certainly most familiar with those three. And we know that Danielle Smith doesn't really actually care all that much, because one of her first interviews that she gave as Premier, she said she didn't care if she lost seats in Calgary and failed to win any seats in Edmonton. It just wasn't a priority for her. In fact, she was willing to trade them off.
Okay, we'll do one more pass for questions on the line. And seeing none, that's all for today.
Thank you.
So much for watching, and to learn more, check out albertasfuture.ca.